To me, one of the worst parts of elementary school was when they would try to make us sell things for fundraisers. It seemed like it was always nuts or wrapping paper, like nothing that anyone really wanted to buy at some insanely marked up price. So when it was time, usually around Christmas, I would put in like the bare minimum amount of effort and basically get my mom and a few of her coworkers to buy some things. But the more industrious among us would go door to door to try to sell these items to neighbors. And that's what 13-year-old Brandy Myers was doing in her Phoenix, Arizona neighborhood on May 26, 1992. But while she set off that evening full of fundraising goals for her school's Read-A-Thon, that night would change everything. Because Brandy Myers never came home. And now, nearly 30 years later, her younger sister Kristin is on a search for justice. When a person goes missing, there's a special kind of pain in the not knowing. I want to tell the stories of those who never came home. I want to tell you the story of Brandy Myers. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And this is And Then They Were Gone. So did you ever have to sell things when you were a kid?
So I remember getting all of the flyers.
The flyers, yeah.
But I don't believe we ever actually did anything with it. Growing up, my family was very poor, so I don't think any of us actually purchased anything, and I don't remember selling anything.
Yeah. I figured it was probably a little bit different because I went to 9 different elementary schools, but they were all in Virginia. And I feel like my whole school experience was very different from yours, like in Pittsburgh and in, when you lived on the farm, especially.
Oh, yeah. Well, by the time I got to the farm, there were
Nothing.
No fundraisers. Yeah. I mean,
no, but I love Pittsburgh because I love when we go there and our friends' kids are selling pierogies and
I know. Yeah.
fries on salads or whatever. I don't know.
Pepperoni rolls and stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's it's a whole other world. I love it.
Dude, it's all the stuff that I would have bought if I were selling any of that stuff as a kid.
Oh yeah, for sure. They've gotten smarter.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get to the case of Brandy Myers. Brandy was born on March 13th, 1979 in Phoenix, Arizona to Daryl Myers and Cheryl Nall. The photos of her show a skinny blonde girl with these absolutely gigantic blue glasses. They are extremely cute. And there's this one picture of her, and it's not the picture that is shown with most of her, news stories and things like this, but she's wearing these glasses and she has on this t-shirt and she has on a half ponytail with a scrunchie, and it's very early 90s, but she also looks very much like, I don't know, Brie Larson or something. She just has this very hipster kind of, they're not even hipsters anymore. That's 10 years ago,
Yeah.
But whatever the Gen Z kids are now, it looks very much like that. I wasn't able to find a whole lot of biographical information on Brandy or her family, but I did watch an interview that Brandy's younger sister Kristin did with Kendall Ray on YouTube. In it, she talks about how she and Brandy were raised by a single mother and that they didn't know their father growing up. Brandy and Kristin were only 2 years apart, and despite Kristin being a self-described snot, the pair was close, Kristin talks about one of her favorite memories with her sister. They were at a school event, and there was a raffle that was based on your seat number. And Brandy had her heart set on this stuffed baby zebra. Brandy's number was called, but it was called right after another girl had already claimed the stuffed animal.
Oh, no.
I know, right? So Kristin convinced Brandy to go with the Operation game because it was the late 80s or early 90s. And, Operation was hot stuff. That was a great game.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So Brandy got that. But then after the event was over, Kristin went over and started schmoozing with the winner of the stuffed zebra and was like, oh, we're so lucky. We won Operation. Have you played that game? It's so fun. And basically got the girl to trade with her.
I can see where this con is going.
I know, right? Yeah. So she got the zebra. And, I wanted to bring that up because Kristin, she was a good sister. Like, even if she didn't always say or do the exact right thing, she was a good sister to Brandy when they were kids. And she's even more of an amazing sister now.
What's the age difference? You
2 years.
2 years?
Yeah.
So 79 and 81?
Thereabouts, yeah.
So that's the exact same age difference between my brother and I.
Oh.
Yeah, same years.
Yeah.
And oh God, no.
Right. No, I know. It was very violent with you guys.
Yeah, no. There was not a lot of love until we got older.
Yeah, and so I think, because they were girls, maybe there wasn't as much physical, whatever. But it just sounded like an extremely typical relationship between siblings that are only 2 years apart. They hung out together, they played together, but she got on her older sister's nerves and vice versa, and they fought, and it's just what you would expect.
Maybe not with knives running around the kitchen.
Maybe, but maybe not. You never know.
Yeah.
So, in fact, a lot of this story is actually going to be more about Kristin, because unlike most of the stories that we tell on this podcast, at this point, the case of Brandy Myers isn't much of a mystery. Instead, it's a search for justice. It's the quest of a girl who lost her best friend when she was 11 years old, who is trying to find justice despite seemingly insurmountable obstacles. So I'm going to come out and say it right here at the top of the episode. Brandy Lynn Myers is dead. She has been dead since 1992. She is not coming home.
And we're sure of that.
Well, her family is sure of that. Even the police are sure of that.
But I'm assuming that since this is a missing persons case or a missing persons podcast, there's no body.
Correct. Brandy Myers has not been found, and she has not gotten justice. And that's something that her baby sister, Kristin Thelen, is trying to change. So let's go to the day that Brandy disappeared, May 26th, 1992. I mentioned in the intro that she was going door to door selling things for a school fundraiser, and that isn't exactly accurate. A lot of sites report it that way, but she was actually getting people to pledge money for her school's Read-A-Thon. So basically, people would pledge a dollar amount for each book that Brandy read. Apparently, the prize for the student who raised the most money was a trip to the zoo, and Brandy really wanted that prize, so she was driven. Brandy would usually take Kristin with her, and they would go door to door around the neighborhood trying to collect pledges. May 26, 1992 was no different. The girl's mother was away, so they were being watched by a babysitter. According to Kristin, the babysitter didn't actually do much babysitting. Much later, Kristin found out that the babysitter was actually using drugs, so the kids spent a lot of time playing outside alone, basically, while they were in her care. That day, Brandy was likely making her final push for pledges, and she was apparently only $6 away from her goal. She asked Kristin to come make the rounds with her again, but Kristin didn't want to, because a boy she had a crush on was coming by, so Kristin wanted to stay and see him.
At 12?
11.
At 11?
Yeah. You're trying to tell me you didn't have crushes when you were 11?
Oh, well, I'm sure I did, but I had a really messed up childhood, so.
I think that's pretty normal.
Okay. Well, the only reference I have is outside of my experience is either yours or what our kids are going through. Mm-hmm. So, and I feel like our kids don't have crushes yet.
Well, they're also not in school because we're in a pandemic.
Fair enough.
So Kristin told Kendall Ray that she was mean about wanting to stay behind. She called Brandy a nerd and said that she couldn't be seen with her. And Kristin was just an 11-year-old being a butt to her sister, but those ended up being the last words she ever spoke to her.
That's tough.
It is. again, she obviously didn't do anything wrong. She was 11 years old.
God, I said a lot worse to my brother.
Exactly. But I mean, when that ends up being the last thing you ever say, and it's 30 years later, I mean, she's thought about that.
I'm sure.
Yeah, every single day. The girls lived on the second floor of an apartment building, and Kristin says she was hanging off of the balcony when Brandy left, which is such, like, I literally remember living in Florida when I was a little kid, and we lived in an apartment building, and actually it might have been Richmond. Either way, I remember like kids would do that. They would hang off of like the second floor balconies, and some of them would jump.
Yeah, totally. I mean, my dad lived in apartment buildings that had fire escapes. Those like old metal fire escapes out the back. Yeah, I mean that was our playground.
So when Kristin was hanging off this balcony and she saw Brandy leave, she saw her walk through a copse of trees and head toward the single-family homes nearby. She said that in that moment, she had this feeling in the pit of her stomach that something bad was going to happen. But she never could have imagined what that actually was. A few hours passed. It was starting to get late, but Brandy hadn't returned. The babysitter was getting worried at this point, but, figured that Brandy would show up before her mom got home. But when Cheryl returned home, there was still no Brandy. They all set off looking for her and started asking neighbors, but no one had seen the 13-year-old. Cheryl became especially worried because Brandy was very trusting. She had also been diagnosed with having brain damage, so she was especially vulnerable.
What was the brain damage from?
I don't know. That's never elaborated on in anything that I've read. But it just says that she was diagnosed at some point with brain damage. And so, again, she was very trusting, very vulnerable.
So it didn't go into the details of what the
no, so I don't know if it was something she was born with or like if it was due to an accident of some sort.
Or what her behavioral tics were or anything like that due to it. Okay.
When they couldn't find Brandy, Cheryl called the police. They mobilized and a search for the young girl began. Early on, there was a tip that sounded promising, but that may have ended up wasting precious time and sent police looking in the wrong direction. A little girl in the neighborhood said that she had been with Brandy. At some point, they walked together to a convenience store where the little girl went inside to use the bathroom while Brandy waited in the parking lot. When she was finished, she said that Brandy was gone.
So is this girl familiar to her sister?
Yes.
So just another neighborhood kid.
Yes.
That
they went to school together
and hung out with.
Well, that's the thing. It doesn't sound like they did hang out together, which is one of the reasons why Kristin never really understood. This whole thing never really made sense to Kristin.
Okay.
And we'll get into that because it is very strange. But this witness account became so pervasive that when you look up stories about Brandy, most of them mention that she was last seen at this store. But according to Kristin, again, and this is in that Kendall Ray YouTube video interview that she did, Kristin says this never happened. Apparently, like I said, it never sat right with her because it was completely out of character for Brandy. Brandy was really focused on this read-a-thon. Like I said, I mean, she was going night after night to go and get pledges. And the convenience store was in the complete opposite direction of where Kristin saw Brandy heading when she left their apartment. Mm-hmm. Plus, apparently this girl used to pick on Brandy. So Kristin didn't even understand why Brandy would have been hanging out with her in the first place.
Yeah, but you also said that part of the thing was that she was overly trusting.
Right. Yeah. No, that is a good point.
During the police investigation, did they look at any surveillance tape that the store might have had?
It doesn't sound like there was any. Kristin actually says that she confronted the girl. It sounds like it was a lot later, though. Mm-hmm. And the girl said that she doesn't even remember saying this story.
Yeah. So how old did you say the girl was?
I don't know how old the girl was. Yeah. I don't know if she was, but I mean, around their age, 11, 12, 13, somewhere kind of in that general.
So she could have been making it up, but to what end, no one knows.
Well, Kristin just honestly thinks that she made it up to get attention.
Yeah, that's a possibility. And, okay, so you don't have surveillance video from the store, but I'm sure police could corroborate, at the very least, the little girl going into the store if they had talked to the clerk.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. And I mean, it sounds like maybe she did go in, but again, like nobody in the store ever saw Brandy in the parking lot or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that part of it at least was definitely never corroborated. But it was kind of all they had, you know? Yeah. And when they were trying to kind of come up with this timeline, you know, they had her leaving, and then they had a couple neighbors say like, oh yeah, she knocked on our door. And then you have this little girl saying later that they were at this convenience store together. And that just kind of became known as her last narrative. Yeah, right. Her last known sighting. Yeah. And it's to this day part of the narrative. But, you know, whatever her motivation, whatever it really was, it sent police literally in the wrong direction. And because it doesn't seem like Brandy went anywhere near that store. So unsurprisingly, the search yielded no results that night. But 2 days later, the police made a horrifying discovery. The search for Brandy took authorities to the Central Arizona Project Canal, which was only a few miles away from Brandy's apartment complex. There, in a pile of trash, they came across the body of a girl with giant glasses. She had been strangled to death. Authorities, of course, thought that they had found Brandy's body. The girl was around the same height and weight as the missing 13-year-old, but terrifyingly, it wasn't Brandy Myers. It was a completely different murdered girl.
So I'm assuming we're going to get into the details of her before I start asking questions.
Absolutely, because I think it's really important that we do take some time to talk about this victim, because as much as this episode is about getting justice for Brandy Myers, like it really needs to be about her as well.
Well, sure, especially if this is a serial killer.
Right.
Yeah.
After police determined that the victim from the canal wasn't Brandy, they, of course, started to try to figure out who she was. They searched missing persons reports, but nothing. No one had reported this girl missing. Police searched for months, but couldn't find answers. Eventually, she was buried as a Jane Doe in the Twin Buttes Cemetery in Tempe, where she would remain without a name for nearly 20 years. But in 2011, a grant would help this girl get her name back. Maricopa County received a $138,000 federal grant to fund research into unidentified deaths. For Dr. Laura Fulganiti, a forensic anthropologist for the county's medical examiner's office, they knew that the girl from the canal was one of the unidentified victims that they needed to investigate further. So in March of 2011, she was exhumed. Investigators already knew that no missing persons reports had been filed for anyone matching Jane Doe's description, so instead they started looking at reports of runaways between 1989 and 1992 when the body was discovered.
So here we're running into the same issue that we've been running into over the last couple of episodes. Mm-hmm. Runaways versus missing persons, mm-hmm. missing children, mm-hmm. and how they're treated differently and how cops just don't look for runaways.
Right. But in 2011, they sifted through 1,600 reports and narrowed those down to 100. And of that 100 reports, one name kept on coming up over and over again: Shannon Amok. Shannon had run away 40 times between 1989 and 1991, but after 1991, the reports stopped. And like the reason the reports stopped and just Shannon's life in general made me close my eyes and take several deep breaths when I was reading about it. Shannon was born in 1976 to a 16-year-old mother. She was the product of a sexual assault. Her mom tried to raise her, but ended up turning Shannon over to Child Protective Services when she was 3. From there, Shannon was quickly adopted by a family who lived in Flagstaff, Arizona. But what should have been her happy ending most certainly was not. Shannon was an unhappy child who apparently had a lot of behavioral issues. When she was 10, she was already running away and having run-ins with police, so her family sent her to a therapist. During one of her sessions, the psychologist asked Shannon what she would want on her tombstone if she were to die. Shannon replied that she would want it to be blank because no one cared for her while she was alive, so why would anyone care when she was dead?
Why? Why would you ask that?
So it sounds like it was kind of a scared straight kind of thing almost, because like Shannon had already been getting into trouble with the law and like was, running wild, running away, doing all this stuff. So it sounds like it was kind of like, well, if you keep on doing these things, you're going to die. And so what would you want your tombstone to say? I don't know. That's just kind of what I inferred, but I'm not sure.
Well, it doesn't sound like that's going to get to the root of any problems, but I mean, I guess if the root of the problem is that she feels that she's unwanted or unloved, then maybe you start asking questions about the adopted family, and
who've had her since she was 3.
Right, and how they've been treating her.
Yeah. I don't know how they were treating her and what this family was like, except for the fact that 2 years later, when Shannon was 12, her adopted parents, who had been raising her since she was 3, like we just said, and I just need to say that again, decided that they had had enough. So they returned their 12-year-old daughter to CPS and just pieced out, I guess.
Look, we're not in their shoes. We didn't go through anything that they went through, but what the fuck?
She was their daughter. Listen, I know, and I'm not an adoption expert, nor do I claim to be one. But, I do know that broken adoptions are a thing, and that, sometimes an adoption it happens, but then it doesn't work out. But 9 years, they raised this girl from the age of 3 to 12.
Yeah.
I can't even wrap my mind around that because
no, neither can I.
You're her parents.
Yeah.
This isn't some legal arrangement. You have at that point all of the rights and responsibilities of her biological parents.
Yeah.
And they just said no and dropped her off. So shockingly, things didn't get better for Shannon, who then started bouncing between various foster homes and group homes. She continuously ran away and basically had contact with the police on a weekly basis for years. In early 1992, she was released from the Adobe Mountain Detention Center and sent to live at yet another group home. Shortly thereafter, around April of 1992, Shannon ran away yet again. She was reported missing, but her case was never followed up on. Now, at this point, your question may be, what do you mean her case was never followed up on? She was in the care of the state. There are rules about these things.
Yeah, all things that I've said previously, but it does not surprise me because, look, the CPS system, the child welfare system, is just terrible. There's no other way to say it. It's terrible. We just talked about it this past week. I was 22 when I was a social worker. And I was making decisions to remove kids from homes, and that's who they put out there.
Yeah,
with very little training. It doesn't surprise me that this kid would get lost in the system, or out of the system, really.
Well, so that's what was super crazy to me, is that it wasn't that she got lost in the system so much as she got thrown away by the system.
Right.
So this is how the state treated this situation. Much like Shannon's adopted family threw up their hands and just said, "We give up," so did the state. When Shannon didn't show back up after she ran away, Arizona Child Protective Services petitioned the court to relinquish their responsibility since she had run away so many times.
What judge would agree to that, though?
this judge, and I don't know the judge names, but the court granted this petition. So no one in the entire world was looking for Shannon, who had just turned 16 years old. As Detective Stuart Summershow of the Phoenix Police Department's Missing Persons Unit put it, quote, "She was tossed aside in death as she was in life," end quote. Shannon was eventually positively identified through DNA. Her biological mother still lived in Arizona and submitted her DNA to police. So while Shannon has had her name back for the past decade, no one has been arrested for her murder. But hopefully that will change because a lot of people think that Shannon and Brandy are connected.
Well, they're in the same neighborhood.
Exactly. Yeah. 2 miles. So Shannon was found about 2 miles from where Brandy lived.
Okay. So, and how old was Shannon at the time of
16.
death? She was 16 years old.
Mm-hmm. Brandy was 13.
I know you mentioned strangulation. What else was revealed about her death?
Not much, really. I mean, she was found with her clothes.
Okay.
I think there might have been a sexual component to it, but she had like jeans and a flowered sweater, and her glasses were still with her. I think she had a bow in her hair. But yeah, they didn't give a ton of details about her death.
What was the time lapse from when she ran away to when her body was found?
I believe it was a few months from that last report to when she was found. So she has a lot of unaccounted for time because it's not like she had been in that canal for an exceptionally long period of time. I'm not sure exactly how long they thought she had been there, but it wasn't nearly as long as the time that she had been missing.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of the potential pedophile that had her.
Mm-hmm.
So several months. Age is still 16.
Mm-hmm.
So the difference between a 13-year-old girl and a 16-year-old girl is tremendous.
Well, not always. And in this case, physically, it wasn't.
Okay. So now we're narrowing down the type that this predator will say, because we don't know whether there's a sexual component to this, but we'll say the predator has young girls.
Mm-hmm. They're, like I said, they were both very skinny, kind of like gawky, you know, yeah.
Caucasian.
Mm-hmm.
Similar builds, yeah, same ethnicity, relatively same age. I think it's safe to say that there is a predator, at the very least, if not a pedophile, either stalking that neighborhood or living in that neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. So remember when I said at the top of this episode that this case wasn't as much of a mystery as our other cases?
Yeah.
So now we're going to get to why. I came across Brandy's story via her sister, Kristin, on Sarah Turney's TikTok account. And Sarah has a podcast called Voices for Justice, which she initially started after her older sister, Alyssa, disappeared as a teenager. Sarah's also from Arizona, so she and Kristin met each other through different advocacy events. And here is what Kristin is asking for. She believes that Brandy was murdered. She also believes that she not only knows who killed her sister, but that he is already in jail. What she's looking for is prosecutors to charge this man with her sister's murder. So in an effort to help her, I would like to talk about who this guy is and how he came to be a suspect in Brandy's case.
All right.
Shannon wasn't the only victim who was found in the Central Arizona Project Canal. In 1992, Angela Brasso, who was 22 years old at the time, went for a bike ride around the canal. She never returned home. Shortly after her disappearance, a headless body was found near 25th Avenue and Cactus Road in Phoenix. 11 days later, a head was found in the Arizona Canal. It was identified as Angela Brasso.
So 22.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he doesn't necessarily have.
Yeah. And I thought that was interesting too. Because, you know, and I've only seen like one picture of her, but I mean, she doesn't look like the other victims. I mean, she is a Caucasian female,
Right.
But she's 22 and she looks like she's 22. She doesn't look, young for her age or anything like that. Then, just 10 months later, in September of 1993, 17-year-old Melanie Burness also went for a bike ride. Her body was found the next day in the Arizona Canal. Now, DNA was still in its infancy back then in terms of law enforcement, but authorities were able to tie the two murders together because the suspect had left DNA on them.
Do we know what type of DNA?
No, with these kind of older cases, like they're very vague when it comes to stuff like that. I think it was semen, but they don't come out and say that.
Just typically, with serial killers, there is usually a sexual component to it.
Right.
It doesn't always involve sex with the person, but there is usually some type of sexual gratification that comes from the killing, the act, whatever. It is interesting that his victims seem to be of various ages, but kind of in the same age frame. So maybe it's less pedophilia and more aggression towards younger women.
Yeah. They have these two victims and they have DNA that ties them together, but they didn't have anyone to match it to.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so, the case has remained unsolved for over 20 years.
Now, so you said the bodies ended up in the canals. Where were these girls from?
They were from the area. Because they were both, they both went for bike rides, So they lived nearby.
Right, but not in the same neighborhood as Brandy.
No, not necessarily, but it was a pretty, like I said, so she lived in an apartment building. There were single family houses nearby. Like it was a pretty well populated area. It would be equally as likely to me that they would have encountered each other as they wouldn't have encountered each other. You know what I mean? Like it was small enough that maybe they had, but it wouldn't be shocking if they hadn't either.
So this is his dumping ground. The canal.
Mm-hmm.
Again, with serial killers, they tend to follow patterns of either where they hunt or where they dispose of bodies.
Right.
So the pattern of the disposal is there. I was just wondering what the pattern of the...
Yeah, I think it's all similar because it's all just in this very, just a few mile radius.
Okay.
And we don't know that for sure for Shannon just because she was a runaway.
She was a runaway.
You can't, she's harder to nail down.
Yeah.
And before we move on, I just want to pause for a second to give major props to the cold case detectives here. Not only did they sift through all of those runaway reports to find Shannon's identity, but for these cases, the two other murder victims that they had the DNA for, they thought outside of the box. And sometime around 2014, they contacted the Vidoc Society.
What is that?
Well, glad you asked. The Vidoc Society is a group based out of Philadelphia that is made up of profilers, criminologists, forensic scientists, polygraph examiners, retired law enforcement, like basically anyone who has professional experience in solving crimes. They assist law enforcement agencies pro bono and basically just use their collective expertise to help these cold case detectives find some new avenues of investigation. So they don't do any investigating themselves. They look at the case files, they look at everything, and they just kind of brainstorm basically. Yeah. And they help these cold case detectives who, are hitting wall after wall, just find new avenues to explore, like new threads, new possible suspects. They're a very cool organization.
Yeah, it's interesting that the way law enforcement is going nowadays because, there's organizations like that. There's some detectives, some jurisdictions that will embrace the help of, social detectives when they hit those walls, realizing that there are hundreds to thousands of armchair detectives out there, and any fresh set of eyes to a case, especially ones that have gone cold, is a good thing.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because one of the podcasts that I listen to is the Murder Squad, and that's actually I think the first time I ever heard of the Vidoc Society, but they recently had an episode where they had a cold case detective on the show talking about one of his cases. It's like, yeah, we've got nothing.
Yeah.
So like,
help.
Yeah, somebody told me about your podcast, so like I want to come on and talk about this case.
Yeah, and of course, obviously they can't like give away all of the information.
Yeah,
but the information that is already out there in the public, if it's bringing more attention to it, and you know, somebody knows something again.
Yeah,
you know, just getting it out there in the media. It's just interesting the way law enforcement sometimes is embracing that.
No, it is. And it's great. And this guy, like, you know, it was a really good episode because he was just like, yeah, like, I have nothing. Give me your tips. This case is over 20 years old.
Yeah.
You know, if you know something, like, please share it because we need it.
Yeah. And it's also interesting to juxtapose the hesitancy of law enforcement in some jurisdictions to do that with investigative reporters or podcasters or whatever. But rewind to 20 plus years ago, they would have had no problem putting this on America's Most Wanted.
Oh, yeah.
Or, you know, it's the same. So, I mean, yes, social media is one thing, but before social media, there was television.
Yeah.
There was primetime Unsolved Mysteries, America's Most Wanted. Everybody watched those shows.
Yeah.
You know, and it brought about the same thing, getting the word out there, getting people, you know, involved in these cases. And it's just interesting that there's hesitancy towards doing the same thing with podcasters.
No, you're right. And that is interesting. But I bet if we were not children back then and like, you know, could see behind the scenes, I'm sure there were a lot of people who didn't want to have America's Most Wanted
That's true.
in their business either. You know what I mean?
That's
I'm
true.
sure there are a lot of people who didn't want Robert Stack to like talk about their case. So my guess is that things are kind of probably the same.
You're right. Probably.
I think people don't really change, but you know.
Well, shit definitely doesn't change in law enforcement. I'll tell you that much.
So in the cases of these two murders, the Vidoc Society concluded that their unknown perpetrator was a man who still lived in the area and who had crossed paths with law enforcement before. So like that gave them a starting point. Then police met with a genetic genealogist named Colin Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick was able to take the DNA information that police had and find the person's last name by using the Y chromosome to find the donor's paternal lineage. So after his initial analysis, the police had a last name.
Nice.
Miller. Unfortunately, Miller is a pretty common surname, and there were several who were living near the canal in the 90s. But partially due to the information they had gotten from Vidoc and through their own investigation, they already had someone with the last name on their list of suspects. 42-year-old Brian Patrick Miller. So now police finally have a direction in these two unsolved murder cases. So they start to take a harder look at Brian Miller. Brian was already known to law enforcement for a variety of reasons. In 1989, when he was just 16 years old, he stabbed an 18-year-old woman in the back as she was walking to the Paradise Valley Mall. The woman survived, and Miller pled guilty to attempted second-degree murder. He ended up only serving about a year in juvenile detention before being released when he turned 18.
So this is the start of his type.
Right. And it's interesting because, so this was an 18-year-old woman, and most of the reports say that he was 16 at the time. Some say that he was 15. So I think it might have been like close to his birthday or something like that. But in any case, young, 15, 16 years old, when he stabs a stranger in the back.
Yeah, and his aggression is directed towards women, generally speaking, around that age. I'm wondering, is it coming from being the son of a young mother, or maybe there was an older sister that was abusing him?
I don't know. I couldn't find a whole lot of information about his life, although in the 90s, when these murders were taking place, he was living with his mother.
So we have a real Norman Bates situation going on here.
Well, maybe. I think his mother was alive, to be sure.
Okay.
But this wasn't Miller's first trouble with the law, right? He didn't just go from zero to stabbing a woman in the back. He had been in and out of trouble prior to this. In fact, he had just been released from juvenile detention for criminal damage in March of 1989. And the stabbing took place just 2 months later.
So his criminality is progressing.
Absolutely. And the people at the juvenile detention center saw that. While he was in detention before the stabbing, he was given a treatment plan. And according to an article in AZ Central, it said in part, quote, Miller managed his feelings through fantasy and escapism, and it described him as emotionally immature, frustrated, angry, destructive, impulsive, and depressed.
So, the basic workup of every serial killer.
Yeah, basically,
that's go watch Mindhunter. That's exactly what they describe.
Yeah, it's crazy. And the plan said that Miller needed to, quote, work through major issues dealing with sexuality, end quote. And a juvenile court judge had strongly recommended he be considered for the juvenile sex offenders program.
Probably stemming from sexual abuse that had occurred to him.
Right. And that's all. I have no idea.
Pure speculation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure, but it fits the bill.
Right. And especially, and I do find that interesting because at that time, like I said, he was in juvenile detention for criminal damage. It wasn't anything sexual or like that. So the fact that...
But then there was behavior within the juvenile detention system that triggered them to realize...
something else is going on here. He's not just some punk who spray painted graffiti or whatever criminal damage means, you know? And it's not clear whether he was actually enrolled in this juvenile sex offender program. It's not clear if that ever happened, if he ever received any sort of treatment or any diversion or anything. Then in 2002, Miller was living in Washington State. And so this is, we're talking 10 years after all of this happened. So he stabbed this woman in the mall in 89. These murders, which at this point he's not connected to, happened in 92 and 93. So fast forward, 10 years and he's living in Washington State. And on May 23rd, 2002, a woman named Melissa Ruiz Ramirez was walking in Everett, Washington, when a man pulled up in a car. She recognized him from her friend's apartment complex. So when he offered her a ride, she said yes. And, they had a chat in the car but he kind of said some creepy things about, it being dangerous for women to, walk alone, kind of stuff like that. So somehow he got her back to his workplace. He took her to his workplace and stabbed her in the back with a 12-inch serrated knife.
Jesus.
Yeah. Melissa survived. And Brian Miller was arrested. However, he was acquitted after he said that she had tried to rob him.
What?
Right? Why did he have a 12-inch serrated knife? Where? I don't know. Maybe he worked at a restaurant. They don't specify. I don't think he did. I think he worked in IT or something. But I don't, and I couldn't find any more details about this case, but yeah, he was like, oh no, she tried to rob me. So I stabbed her in the back with a 12-inch knife.
Well, yeah. So how did he end up, stabbing her in the back versus the front if she's trying to rob him? And did she have a weapon?
Doesn't sound like it.
Did she just give him the finger gun and say,
this is a robbery?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stick up, give me your money.
I have no idea. But whatever tale he spun worked.
The jury bought it, or the judge, I guess, depending on if it was a bench trial or not. But wow.
After his acquittal, Brian moved back to Arizona. While initially he led a quiet life back there, he wouldn't always. And I just know how you're going to react to this. Brian became known around Phoenix as the zombie hunter.
What?
Yeah. This dude bought a decommissioned police car and covered it in decals and fake blood.
Oh my.
He would dress up in costumes and market himself as the zombie hunter on Facebook. He'd make appearances at conventions and comic book shops.
Okay.
Yeah, and listen, this is in no way meant to disparage the cosplay community. Like, we have a lot of friends who do this.
Yeah.
They're totally normal people and not serial killers, and they're very cool and, whatever. But this fucking guy. All right, so I've got to show you like a picture before we even go any further.
Okay.
All right, so I'm about to show you two pictures. One is just a picture of him. He's in a t-shirt, glasses, whatever. And then the other one is a picture of him in his zombie hunter vehicle.
Oh, wow. Not really sure where to go with this. Well, that's frightening.
Can you talk about what you're seeing? Because like that top picture, like scared the crap out of me when I was researching this. Because, I found that picture after I had read about all these murders and the beheading and all of this stuff. And then I saw that picture. I was like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, so he's got what looks like an old Crown Vic, and then he has put like an external cage over the front windshield. He's got some sort of mannequin head in the back. Presumably that's a zombie. He is dressed in, it looks almost like a World War I helmet, and then has this very bizarre face mask with goggles on.
And he has, here, I'll show you another picture because there's another one where he has like a bazooka or something. Like, I don't know what that thing is.
It looks like a Nerf gun.
Well, it doesn't look like a Nerf gun because Nerf guns are like orange and blue. And
well, I mean, he's done some modifications to it, but
but it's huge.
Yeah. Maybe it's a converted tear gas launcher. Also with modifications to it, but I mean, hey, look, if he were just a cosplayer, like, great cosplay.
Right. And that's how the people of Phoenix saw him, right? Because like I said, he would go to Comic-Cons and things like that and just do this thing. But it's like looking at it in context. And the thing that I found especially chilling about that first picture I show you, and again, all these are going to be on our website so you can see them. But there was not only fake blood on the outside of the car, but there was a handprint.
Yeah.
Like that handprint.
So I don't necessarily think that he's using his cosplay vehicle to hunt.
No.
humans.
I honestly think, I don't think that at all. I really don't. I think that, not that necessarily they're completely unrelated because like it's all probably intertwined in some deep
Weird
pathology or whatever.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think that he's like going around, hunting ladies instead of zombies or anything like that. I don't think it's like that. I think it's more of a kind of a double life situation.
Sure.
And what's crazy to me is, I mean, all of this, like literally all of this, obviously. But this man, Brian Miller, who had been convicted of stabbing one woman and acquitted of stabbing another, had a teenage daughter.
Oh, my.
And not only that, he had won sole custody of her in 2008. So in 2015, she was about 15 years old and living with him in a house that was described by police as a hoarding situation. All right, but let me back up a little bit. So the police have the zombie hunter in their sights, but like no real proof, right? So they have the genealogist who gave them the last name Miller and said that, he lived nearby, he was still in the area. And that came from the Vidoc Society. Mm-hmm. And there was a man who had kind of always been on their long list of suspects who fit that description. It was Brian Miller. But they don't have any real proof at this point. They need his DNA so that they can test it against the DNA found
Directly
on the
link
two
it.
canal victims. And this brings me to a third reason why I love these cold case detectives, they made up some bullshit and like got his DNA. So Mr. Zombie Hunter met a police officer for dinner. The police officer was posing as a security company employee who said he needed Miller's help surveilling a business that was located near Miller's place of employment. And like this ding dong bought it. So they had this dinner and like Zombie Hunter's chest was probably all puffed out and he was feeling important because like the security company needed his help and, you know. So when he left the restaurant, the cop just yoinked his mug and got a DNA sample off of it.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And while I love everything about how they brought this guy down, my very favorite part may be that it all took place at a Chili's. Like, I love a Chili's. I love a margarita and some veggie fajitas. Like, you know this. And the fact that they have the audacity to put friggin' quesadillas on a damn salad. Like, I love a Chili's. But the idea of getting dinner at Chili's and then getting arrested for a double murder that happened 22 years ago, it tickles me. Like, I love that this is how they got him. So Brian Miller is arrested in January of 2015 after the DNA results come back and they're a match for the 2 canal victims. And Miller's basically like, I don't know how my DNA got on those ladies. I liked riding my bike around there. Shrug emoji. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So once this guy's arrested and the police learn about this other stabbing in Washington state, they definitely start thinking there's a possibility that there could be more victims out there.
I've got to believe that there's more victims. Like, you don't just go for long periods of time.
Right, like 10 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Without doing this. You know, if this is his pathology, this is what he does. You don't just stop. The behavior was problematic when he was 15. Now we're 10 years ahead. And he just hasn't done anything like that. I don't think that that's real. I think that he has probably had other victims that were not necessarily able to identify him or associated with him. And I don't know whether that means that he killed them or he did random stabbings. Mm-hmm. But I don't believe that these are the only instances of him acting out like this.
And this is a belief that Brian's ex-wife, Amy, seems to share. Amy told True Crime Daily in 2015 that her marriage to Brian was marked by abuse and terror, often taking the form of non-consensual sadomasochistic sex acts. She says that one time in the midst of one of these acts, he used a knife to cut off her hair and told her that he did that in place of slitting her throat. She went on to say that in the last few years of their marriage, he started bragging about all of these violent acts that he had performed against women. She further alleges that he confessed to a murder that she now believes was that of Brandy Myers. And instead of describing what she said, we're just going to listen to the clip.
He had grabbed her and dragged her into his house. He had stabbed her and then cut her throat and killed her. His description was he then placed her body into a bathtub, had intended to fill it with cold water, and accidentally had filled it with hot water because he was so excited, I guess, was his best description. And then chopped up her body and placed it in his trash can until the next trash day.
And Amy provided...
Serial killers do have a tendency to boast about crimes that may or may not have been theirs. But that typically only happens once they're caught. This does lend some credibility to him being Brandy's killer.
Yeah, and it's so you're right. He hadn't been caught at this point, and it was, as she said, in the final years of their marriage, and it seemed like he was trying to use it as an intimidation tactic, as a tool of control.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. So after hearing this, Brandy's sister Kristin is convinced that she not only knows what happened to her beloved older sister, but who did it. And the kicker? at the time of Brandy's disappearance, Brian Miller lived just 3 blocks from their apartment complex and only a block away from their school.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, the sisters walked by his house every single day. It was literally on their route from home to school. And now Kristin believes that this door was the last one Brandy knocked on that night in 1992. And the police agree. Not only do they think that Miller was responsible for Brandy's disappearance, but they also believe that he's the one who murdered Shannon Amok. They're so confident in this that they submitted a recommendation to the prosecutor's office for a charge of first-degree murder in Brandy's case. However, the county attorney declined to prosecute Miller for Brandy's death, citing there was, quote, no likelihood of conviction, end quote.
I mean, there's no evidence. I mean, the evidence that is there is circumstantial.
Right.
There's no direct link. As much as that sucks, and as clearly as everybody can see it, if you don't have hard evidence that says that he actually was the one that did it, or that puts Brandy in his house, like, you're not going to get a conviction on that.
Right. And so that's kind of where Shannon's case is too, basically, because they don't have the DNA evidence that they have in the other 2 cases. But the difference between Shannon and Brandy is that Brandy has Kristin, but Shannon literally has no one who is going to fight for her. So I want to use our voice, as small as it may be, to add to the chorus of people like Sarah Turney, who I mentioned at the beginning, who knows Kristin and knows the pain of losing a sister. In fact, I want to play an excerpt of the video that Sarah Turney posted that led me to wanting to do this episode.
Here I am. Just one desperate sister. I'm trying to create public pressure, and I don't have any of the things that you need to create public pressure, but I know that my sister was my world, and everybody that mattered to me just died inside when she didn't come home, and I was only 11.
So I just saw that on TikTok. I didn't know anything about this case. I didn't know anything about any of this. And, I'd never heard the name Brian Patrick Miller before, but it broke my heart. And I really felt the need to look into this and just talk about it, because she's just so desperately wants people to tell her sister's story.
Yeah. So he's serving time right now.
No. So, Brian Patrick Miller is still awaiting trial for the murders of Melanie Burness and Angela Barrasso, and he's in Arizona, so this is a death penalty case. So there's still time to pressure prosecutors into including Brandy and Shannon and finding justice for these girls. And to your point, yes, there is no physical evidence that he murdered Shannon or Brandy. But how many times have we heard of cases, especially death penalty cases, where that can maybe get taken off the table?
Sure.
If, they admit to other crimes, right? And to me, like that, the fact that this is a death penalty case is really, the one thing that kind of police have or prosecutors, I should say, have in their favor on this, right? Like that's their bargaining chip, because, I'm hoping he kind of realizes that he's going down for this and really just starts trying to save himself. And if we can get this, publicly out there, and by we, I mean basically the true crime community at large. I don't mean like our one little podcast.
Yeah, sure.
But if we can get this out there and create that public pressure that Kristin talks about, that the authorities have told her she needs to get.
Well, I go back to what I said earlier. I don't think that there's only 4 victims here. Yeah. And I agree that the pressure needs to be put on the DA's office, because like you don't know how many other victims are out there.
Right.
And serial killers do not operate in bubbles.
Yeah.
They do not operate, they don't come in and out of committing these crimes. They may not have all been murders, because we saw earlier.
Well, for several weren't. Yeah.
Exactly. But there may have been other victims of stabbings, of random attacks, of random stabbings. And it escalated through the years to murder. And we see that he's got a penchant for stabbing, strangulation, and decapitation. Now, just through your research, we don't know what all of his movements were through his entire life. So there's a possibility that he could he could be linked to many other.
Right, because in addition to Arizona and Washington State, he also lived in Hawaii for a time. So there's a possibility that he has crimes there, but there's nothing from Hawaii that's ever been linked to him.
Right.
And so that's the thing, because if you look at the timeline, so he starts this in 1989 with that first stabbing. The murders of Brandy, Shannon, Melanie, and Angela all took place in like 92, 93, right? So they were kind of clustered together at this time that he was living in this neighborhood by the canal in Arizona with his mother. Then we don't know of anything until a decade later almost in Washington State. So there could have been...
Yeah, people like this don't...
Yeah.
That's not... They don't just stop unless there's some force exerted from them from the outside. Like you will see serial killers take breaks or stop when they get close to being caught, when law enforcement starts zeroing in on them.
And that did not happen at all.
Right. If this guy had free reign and he is a true serial killer, which it seems as though he is, he definitely fits the profile, he's doing more than what we know of.
Yeah. And, we do have the cases of serial killers who have like stopped or taken a break or whatever when they got married and had families,
Yes,
right?
that's true.
You saw this with BTK. Yeah.
Right.
So his daughter was born around 2000 because she was around 15 when he was arrested. But so let's just say that happened. And I'm not exactly sure what year he got married to Amy, but that's still several years between these Arizona murders and the Washington State stabbing.
Right.
And yeah, like he did get married and have a daughter, but there's several years before that are kind of that nothing happened. So he has this huge cluster between 1989 and 1993. And
he's successful at it.
Right.
That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Is if you're a serial killer and you try and you basically fuck up, then we've seen evidence in other cases where they scale back or change their tactics, but he was successful.
Right.
So that's only going to
embolden him, right?
Yes, that's going to embolden him. That's going to give him the impetus to do it again, to try even more brazen tactics. Like this is not somebody that just does things randomly and then goes into hiding for a few years for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, because he was never even questioned in any of these murders.
I have to believe there are more victims out there.
Right. And so, that's where I think the pressure comes in. Because again, like I get what the prosecutors are saying, right? Because they want this guy off the streets.
Sure.
They want the slam dunk. They've got the DNA in these two cases. And,
it's a slam dunk here. This is bottled up in it's a nice little bundle that they can ride through their careers or whatever. But the bigger picture issue here is that they have a serial killer.
Right.
And they need to really be questioning him and putting the pressure on him to give up what else he's done.
Right, exactly. And so they need to use any bargaining chip that they have in order to do that. Because, again, yes, for them, the sentencing difference between 2 murders and 4 murders, it's not going to matter ultimately, right?
Yeah.
Like, he's going to go away. It doesn't matter. But you've got the death penalty. You've got, whatever else you might have at your disposal, because it's just so important and it's so crucial that they get this guy talking, that they get answers from him.
And a lot of times DAs tend to miss the human aspect of this. So in their mind, they're thinking, well, they're getting this guy off the street, like you just said.
Right.
So in their mind, they're winning because he's no longer a threat to society. The problem with that is that there are more truths out there that need to be spoken. So maybe the death penalty isn't the best option here. And maybe getting him to admit to more killings and closing some of these cases and giving the closure to the family, maybe that's more important than the death penalty.
So here's the crazy thing. So he was arrested in January of 2015, but his trial wasn't originally scheduled until April of 2017. So that's already like a pretty long, period of time between arrest and trial. But that got delayed, and he had like 6 more trial dates after that.
So during all this time, where is he?
He's in jail.
He's incarcerated.
Yes, he is. He is. He has been incarcerated. They were not giving this guy bail.
Oh, yeah. I mean, hey.
I know crazier things have happened.
Yeah.
But no, he has been in jail this entire time, but he is not in prison.
Right.
In late 2019, they had just started pretrial motions in this case, but then the pandemic happened.
Right, yeah.
And his trial, which was at that point set for August 23rd, 2020, was delayed until February 23rd, 2021. But the trial did not start on this date either. So the wheels of justice, though, were still turning, and in January of this year, of 2021, Brian Miller's motion to throw out the DNA evidence from Chili's was denied. He claimed...
Yeah, based on what?
Well, so he claimed that since the police didn't have a warrant, that they violated his constitutional rights when they collected his DNA from that mug.
That's the curtilage rule.
Yeah, I know.
You don't need a warrant to collect something that's available to the public.
And that's exactly what the judge said. He was like, nah, like what happens in Chili's does not stay in Chili's. So fuck off, you creep.
Same reason why police can go through your trash bins once you take them out to the curb.
Exactly.
Public space.
Yeah. So his actual ruling was, quote, customers who walk to a restaurant's exit having left such items behind implicitly communicate their intent to abandon them, end quote. So yes.
Yeah. If anybody listening thinks that this is entrapment, that's not entrapment. Entrapment is that you have to entice them to commit a crime.
Right.
So collecting evidence is not entrapment. Just throwing that out there.
No, that's good. I think that's good to clear up.
Yes. Yeah. Entrapment involves enticing somebody to commit a crime.
Right. And you know that I am always wary of like, I guess, again, I'm very much, innocent until proven guilty. And, you got to be careful about how evidence is collected because, we've all seen shady evidence collection practices, etc.
I think you just like the way it was collected.
I love it so much. I love it so much. Also, it was a mug and it was dinner. And I think people who drink coffee or tea, while they're having dinner are creeps.
Right? Yeah. I feel like that only happens in movies.
Yeah.
Or
TV shows. We were watching Schitt's Creek and Johnny was drinking coffee with his lunch and it really messed with me the other night.
Lunch I can see getting away with if you wake up hungover or something like that. But definitely by dinner time, if you're still hungover and you need a pick me up, you should move on to soda or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So anyway, the fact that it was a mug was just this extra level of creepiness that I couldn't get over. We can all read between the lines. This guy, they got his. I mean, they have his DNA. There's not a whole lot.
He's definitely going to go away for those 2 murders. But the issue is, who else is out there? What other victims are there?
Right.
Even beyond Brandy and Shannon.
So now Brian Patrick Miller's trial is scheduled for September 21st, 2021. So we have some time, but it's not really a lot when it comes down to it, right? Like September 21st does seem like a ways away. Right now this is April,
right?
But it's not a lot of time, and we don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
Right.
So if it's nothing in terms of like adding additional charges or finding more information, then that's scary, because this is coming up. It'll be here, before you know it.
Yeah.
So we can only hope that justice is served for these 4 women and girls who were brutally murdered, and that police can link Miller to any other crimes he may have committed over the years, like you said, either in Arizona, Washington State, or Hawaii, where he also lived. Because Brian Patrick Miller needs to answer for his crimes. Brandy Lynn Myers went missing from Phoenix, Arizona on May 26, 1992. She was 13 years old at the time of her disappearance and was between 4'9" and 4'10", and weighed between 75 and 85 pounds. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, and scars on her upper left knee and her cheek. She wore glasses and has an oval-shaped strawberry birthmark. If you have any information about Brandy's disappearance, please contact the Phoenix Police Department at 602-261-8042. You can see all the sources for this episode along with photos and videos at our website, andthentheyweregone.com.
And be sure to follow us on social, and Then They Were Gone Pod on Facebook, and at ATTWG Pod on Instagram and Twitter. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe and consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That will help new listeners find us. And the more people that listen, the more chances we have of bringing someone home.
And we want to hear from you. You can also leave us a message at the link in our show notes, and we may play it on a future episode. But we'll see you here next week for a brand new episode.
See you next week.
And Then They Were Gone is hosted by Kona Gallagher and Ethan Flick. All research, writing, and editing is done by Kona Gallagher. Theme music is The Stork by Ketsa. Additional music is provided by Kai Engel. And Then They Were Gone is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!